In the last lecture, we talked about, what the term police discretion means, the police choosing what laws to enforce, and the laws about which they have discretion, right? They have discretion when it comes to these so-called mala prohibitum laws. Laws, things that are only immoral because they're illegal, right? Drug laws and traffic laws are the big ones. Some property laws too, as we'll see in a minute. Laws about trespassing, maybe. Now, I think police discretion is going to be really interesting because police discretion, there are some pretty good arguments for allowing the police a fair amount of discretion. But there are also some really worrying issues that come up with it. Del Pozo, who we'll talk about in this lecture, is cautiously in favor of police discretion. He thinks it's a good thing as long as we're careful about it, as long as the police and society are careful about discretion. Luke Hunt, who we will listen to or hear from in a few lectures and we'll talk a fair amount about, Hunt is very much more skeptical about police discretion. I don't know that he would get rid of it entirely, but he thinks it's something we should be worried about and that we should use it a lot less than we do in our system. Okay, so let's talk about Del Pozo and the argument for police discretion. So as I said, Del Pozo is cautiously for police discretion. But he thinks that, any use of police discretion must fit with the basic ideals of liberalism. We talked a lot about liberalism in the first few lectures, right? Liberalism, state neutrality, equality of citizens, emphasis on rights, rule of law. If police are to have discretion, if we are to allow the police discretion, the way they use it must fit with these ideals of liberalism. The way police use discretion must not violate citizens' rights, of course, but beyond that, it has to treat people as equal, and it can't aim to promote some vision of the good life. Well, what does that mean? Well, one thing this means is that police must apply discretion in the same way to different social groups. The way they use discretion cannot discriminate on the basis of things like race or religion or gender or income, or at least Del Pozo would say they shouldn't, right? So an example he gives of the police using discretion in a way that does not fit with liberalism is the infamous Starbucks incident, right? You guys have heard about this, I would hope, the incident in Philadelphia where the cops ended up arresting these people because they were in the Starbucks. They hadn't bought anything yet. They said they were going to buy something. There definitely seems to be a racial component to it. There were a lot of people in the Starbucks not buying anything who the Starbucks didn't try to throw out and the police didn't arrest, right? As Del Pozo points out, in that neighborhood of Philadelphia, I think he knows Philadelphia better than I do, but he says, and I'll take his word for this, in this neighborhood of Philadelphia, white people lounging around in the Starbucks are not going to be treated the same way by the Starbucks or by the police. And look, the police are enforcing the law here, right? Starbucks is private property. And the rights of the people in the Starbucks are not being violated. Look, no one has a right to hang around on anyone else's private property, right? So it's not that the cops are violating their rights. What the cops are doing here that does not fit with liberalism, Del Pozo would say, is that they are not treating people as equal. he's pretty confident, and I'll take his word for this, in this neighborhood of Philadelphia, white patrons in the Starbucks would not be treated the same way by the cops, right? Starbucks would probably not have even called the cops on them, and if they did, the police would have tried a lot harder to resolve it in a way without arresting anyone, right? So you can violate liberalism by violating people's rights, but also, even if you're not in any strict sense violating people's rights, if you're treating people differently based on the membership in a certain group, then you are not treating people as equal before the law. That violates liberalism. And so Del Pozo would say not only should the police in this Starbucks case make sure that they're not treating these people differently because they're African American, but the police generally must make sure that they're not engaging in racial profiling or other forms of profiling that target one group over another. Those, look, if they pull you for violating a law, for running a stop sign or speeding, again, in a very strict sense, your rights are not being violated. No one has a right to run a stop sign. But again, what's being violated is this idea of equality before the law in liberalism. But Del Pozo would say, you have to ask larger questions, not just about, the ways individual police enforce the laws. You have to ask larger questions about the priorities set by whole departments, right? If you send the police no tolerance, less enforced drug laws to a specific neighborhood, well, even though you're not anyone mentioning race or anything like that, or mentioning income, well, people tend to be segregated by race and where they live to some degree in America. Sad fact, but true. People are segregated by income. If you're poor, you simply can't afford to live certain places, and if you're rich, there are places you probably choose not to live. Well, by sending police to those neighborhoods, Del Pozo will say, you are in effect, even if no one ever explicitly says that, or even if that's not the intention, you're violating this principle that you have to treat people equally. Certain people are getting the laws enforced more in their neighborhood and with less tolerance there than a different group of people elsewhere. So Del Pozo, I think, would say, a lot of enforcement in neighborhoods, maybe even, we'll talk more about this when we get to drug laws, drug laws generally, I think someone like Del Pozo would say, should they be such a priority for police departments? Maybe not. So Del Pozo likes the idea of police discretion, but he's going to say we have to be very careful about how we use this. Individual police officers have to think very long and hard about whether what they're doing fits with this ideal of liberalism. Mainly, the important thing it seems to be here, are you treating people as equal before the law? But also, there's worries about promoting a specific vision of the good life. If you let the quote-unquote respectable people off, the people who go to church every Sunday and, 2.5 kids and whatever, but, give a harder time to people who aren't as quote-unquote respectable, well, then you are privileging a certain conception of the good life that also does not fit with liberalism. So, for both individual policemen and for police departments as a whole, and for society who should have some oversight of these departments, Del Pozo is going to say discretion is good, but we have to be careful and we have to think long and hard about making sure discretion fits with the ideas or ideals of liberalism. So why does Del Pozo like discretion? Why does he think that discretion, giving police a fair amount of discretion, is a good thing? And he thinks it's a good thing, not just for police, but for society. Well, one thing that Del Pozo likes about this is that it allows for what he calls brokering cooperation. He says that's better than enforcing it. Well, what does he mean by that, right? Well, he means if police are allowed discretion, they can treat the public more gently, more, act in more nuanced ways, less using force, less just twisting people's arms to do something, right? If someone's out drinking a beer in the middle of the street or right next to the playground, the cop could come and say, hey, look, please don't do this here. Why don't you do it home? And why don't you do it in a way, if you want to sit on your stoop and do it, but do it in a way we don't have to know what you're doing, right? That's better than if the police just arrest this person, throws them in the back of a squad car, right? Better for the person. He's not getting thrown in jail, but we still get the social benefit. We don't have people like, out drunk in front of school kids, right? Just a sort of trivial case, but, Del Pozo will think, we can see that in other similar cases, right? People are making a scene if they're being too loud or whatever. Cops come and tell them, please keep it down. Let's, watch this. Way better than just arresting everyone, right? You don't violate the liberty of the people who are having the party of whatever in the way that arresting them would, but you can still, if the police use discretion rightly, get the thing you want, the thing that will benefit society, which is the neighbors can all go to sleep for whatever, right? Enforcement is punitive. It shows less respect for freedom. Discretion allows police to show more respect for the freedom of the public. Another argument in favor of discretion is that if, Del Pozo doesn't make a big deal of this, but I think it's also really important, is just that discretion allows a sort of more human, nuanced, realistic approach to law enforcement. If the police had to arrest every single person who broke a traffic law, no matter what, that would be impractical, but it would also just be mechanical and in a way unjust. Let me give you guys an example. Years and years ago, I had set this group project on the last day of class. It was a group project. All the other groups had went. It went over like the space of about 2 weeks. There was still two groups. It was sort of a sort of mock. Well, it was actually just a sort of debate, right? I did this in a lot of my in-person classes when I can have in-person classes. And, these last two groups need to do it. It's a huge part of their grade. I know that both groups have been preparing for it. They're going to do well on it. It's very important. I can't just cancel it and say don't do it because these groups have been preparing. I also think both these groups are going to do well, but I can't just say, hey, you guys get an A, whatever. That wouldn't be fair to the other groups who had to work for it, right? So I need to have this class. Well, what happens? I start feeling, it was a night class, I start feeling kind of bad that morning. I go into work and progressively feel worse all day. Now I want to be clear, this was 2 or 3 years ago. This was way, way before COVID was on anybody's radar. But I'm pretty sure I had the flu, right? I get sicker and sicker all day. I feel terrible. I'm pretty sure I had a fever. Kind of dizzy, feverish feeling, coughing, just feel like I've been run over. I go into class. I say to everybody very loudly, y'all stay 10 feet back from me. No one get near me. I'm going to go sit in these 2 back rows. Y'all sit at the front. Keep a bubble around me. You don't want whatever it is I have. So we do the group project. All the while, I'm feeling worse and worse and worse. It's done. I just want to go home and, get these grades in and then sleep for a very long time. Drink lots of NyQuil, right? Actually, now that I think about it, it couldn't have been a night class, but I think it was an afternoon class, right? So I am going back home. And I say it can't be a night class because of this next detail here, right? And I just want to get home. I'm not thinking. There's a part of my commute to work that's usually 45 miles an hour, but when there's something going on at school, the speed limit is 25, right? I'm not thinking of this. All I'm thinking of is just how terrible I feel, and I blaze through this school zone at 45, right? Well, the police officer pulls me, as he well should, right? If you're blazing through a school zone at 45, when it's supposed to be 25, the cop should pull you. He takes one look at me. I mean, I look like, I don't even know what I looked like, but I'm sure I looked terrible, right? I know that I sounded terrible. I'm just croaking out, I just want to get home. I feel terrible, Yes, I'm sorry I was speeding. I didn't even know. Cop takes one look at me. And now the cynical part of me says the cop lets me go because he doesn't want to take the time writing a ticket for me, getting in my face, getting what I've got. But I also do think, a lot of this was just, this guy has a good reason. It's not that he's an idiot or a maniac just driving through here. He feels bad. He won't do this again, right? I think it is very good that this police officer had discretion. He let me go, and that he used it, right, to let me go. If he had to mechanically apply the law and say, look, I don't care, tell it to the judge, well, I don't think that would have been fair, right? Maybe I deserved a ticket, but not for 20 over, I felt terrible. I didn't see it. I had to do my job. I just wanted to get home. I think he did exactly the right thing. Hey, you're going too fast. Don't do this again. Get home. Don't drive again until you feel better, right? If the policeman didn't have discretion, he could not have handled that situation in that way, and that is, I think, the right way to handle it. Plenty of other situations where you can imagine the same thing, right? Yes, you've broken the law, but there's a good reason for the policeman to overlook it. Allowing them discretion, allows them to enforce the law in a more just and realistic way. Okay, so those are the arguments for discretion. I think they're pretty good arguments, but in the next few lectures we're going to see there are some huge worries when it comes to police discretion.